بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. The Quran is the most beautiful narrative, Ahsan al-Qasas. And from amongst the narratives, the narrative of Yusuf alayhi salatu wassalam is one of the most profound and thought-provoking narratives in the whole Quran. At every step, there are many, many lessons to be derived, extracted, many things to contemplate on. At one point, Yusuf alayhi salatu wassalam was, after going through a very difficult period in life, being thrown into a well and then being carried off, sold as a slave, taken to another country, and then living as a slave. But there things started improving. And just when he was being treated with love and respect, he is tested. And the test is a very severe one, a very stringent one. The wife of his master is trying to seduce him. And she has cornered him, locked all the doors, and he has nowhere to go. When she approaches him, Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam says three things. And these three things are what should be on the mind of every believer whenever presented with the situation of breaking the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first thing he said was, Ma'ad Allah, I take the protection of Allah. This has two meanings or two implications. One is that at that time, his trust and his confidence does not exist in himself. It is not based on his own ability, his own piety. He didn't say that I fear Allah, I am very pious, I would never think of such a thing. It's not about him. Instead, he says, I am going to take the protection of the only one who can save me from this. And only if he protects me will I be saved. If he chooses not to protect me, then nothing can save me from this sin. So completely absolving himself from his own strength, his own ability, even his own piety, that at this moment, at this time, nothing can save me but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what I'm going to turn to. And the example of taking protection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like someone who walks down a path, and along the path there's a dog, and the dog barks every time he passes by. And day by day the dog is getting more and more annoying. So now this person has a couple of options. Either he can turn and face the dog and start yelling at the dog, telling it to be quiet, but everyone knows that is only going to agitate the dog even more. The best thing for him to do is to go to the master of the dog, the owner of the dog, and say, can you please put him away? Can you please keep him out, because he's coming, he's bugging me, and I'm afraid that he might even come out and bite me. So the owner of the dog has control over the dog. With one indication, with one short command, that dog will go and listen to what the owner is saying. A person who tries to tackle shaitan by himself, tries to outsmart him, or tries to outsmart temptations just by their own wit, is going to have trouble every single time. But a person who takes the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will win every single time. Why? Because Allah Azza wa Jal is there to protect him. That's why in the du'as taught to us by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we are constantly being reminded to take the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In all of these du'as, especially if you focus on the du'as of the morning and the evening that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us, these are all taking protection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Khair. So the first thing he did was take protection. The second thing is, this message is for Zulaykha, the woman who is trying to seduce him, that look, if Allah protects me, you can't do anything to me. I am not the one who is going to protect myself. Allah is going to protect me. And if He protects me, you will fail. The second thing is, إِنَّهُ رَبِّي أَحْسَنَ مَثْوَاي. And Rabb here, it could be in the allegorical sense, referring to his master. That my master has been very kind with me. He has given me a very good place here. How could I betray him? He has been so kind. He has been so welcoming. He has given me so much respect and comfort. After all of that, how could I betray him? And the other meaning that Mufassirin have mentioned is that Rabb means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that my Allah has been so kind to me. How can I disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In other words, at that time, remember the bounties of Allah. If the breach, if the sin pertains to breaching the trust of a person, then think of all the good that the person has done for you. And if it is breaching the trust or breaching the haqq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then think of everything Allah has done for you. At that time, think of all the good things, all the favors Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon a person, and then think, how can I disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And if it pertains to someone, think of all the good that they have done. How can I betray this person? This person has done this and this and this and this for me. So that's the second thing. And the message is also to her. In every one of these statements, there's a message for him and there's a message for her. That if I am afraid of breaching the trust of my owner, my master, what about you? He's your husband. You should be even more afraid. And the third statement is, إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. If I commit this sin, then this will be an act of dhulm against myself. It will be a wrongdoing, and the wrongdoers will never succeed. So this statement is again to himself, that if I were to listen to you and allow myself to be pulled, lured into this sin, I would fail. I would fail. And if you are the one that is going to try to force me to do this, then even if you succeed, you will fail. So these are three reminders. Whenever a person is faced with a situation where there is a temptation, there is a push towards breaking the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should remember these three statements of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, which he uttered at the time of utmost distress. He's locked in with all of these doors, and the way some Mufassirin have described it is that there were doors inside doors inside doors, 7 sets of doors. He was all the way in the middle. So to get out of the palace, he would have to unlock 7 sets of doors, none of which he had the key. But what did he do at that time? This is the second part of this lesson. Yusuf alayhi salam knows the doors are locked, and he also knows that he does not have the key. But what does he do? He runs towards the door anyways, because that much is in his capacity. Opening the doors right now is not in his capacity, but at least running to the door is. So he does whatever is in his capacity, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts opening the doors. And that's what happened with him. As he ran to the door, each door started opening one at a time, until they reached the outermost door. And that's when she managed to get a little bit of his shirt, grab him by the back of the shirt, and tear it. And just when they get out there, there is the master, and he is watching all of this unfold. So sometimes a person feels that they're trapped in this cycle of committing a sin, or they have been completely surrounded. They feel compelled. It could be because of a social pressure, peer pressure, some kind of environment around them that pulls them towards sinning. But the thing is that Our protector is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our duty is to guard ourselves to the utmost of our ability. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ وَاسْمَعُوا وَأَطِيعُوا. Allah wants us to have taqwa, to avoid His displeasure to the best of our ability, and to listen to His commands and to fulfill His commands. When we do whatever is in our power, we will find how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will intervene, and then His power will take over. Just like what happened with Yusuf alayhi salatu wassalam. Second thing is that we should not make judgments about someone based on their apparent circumstances. And this is in fact a very difficult thing to do, because most of our judgments or assessments about people are based on their apparent circumstances. So, yes, if a person is apparently involved in a sin, then they're involved in a sin, we have to call it as it is. If a person is apparently involved in good deeds, then we have to say that this person is involved in good deeds, and that's all we're responsible for. I am talking about worldly circumstances. Worldly circumstances where things are maybe going in someone's favor, or things are not going in someone's favor. Look at Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. He is who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made him, and he has all of this honor and all of this piety and all of this grace. He has everything, but his circumstances take him at one point to the bottom of a well, at another point as a slave in someone else's house, and another point in jail, and he stays in jail for several years. But look at the muamala of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The dealing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is such that Allah azza wa jal does not hold us accountable or responsible for our worldly conditions that are not in our control. None of these things were in His control. None of them were. But did that affect his position in the sight of Allah? It did not. And did that affect his honor? It did not. In fact, even while he was in jail, people were coming to him and referring to him as Yusufu ayyuhas Siddiq. Yusuf, O Siddiq of our time. He's in jail, he's imprisoned. But his character, his iman, his taqwa is shining and prominent even there in the darkest of places. And it's apparent to anyone who sees him, anyone who interacts with him, that this person is someone very, very special. These are temporary circumstances that they're going through, but that's not who this person is. It takes a person of wisdom to be able to do this. Sometimes we look at somebody who is going through some financial difficulty, or some other kind of difficulty, some family problem, this, that, and the other thing. And right away, our mind starts making judgments. But this is a very dangerous thing to do, because we don't know what the maqam is of that person in the sight of Allah. Sometimes Allah is only bringing that condition upon them to raise them higher. There is no other reason for them to go through all of this difficulty but to take them higher and higher and higher and higher. And there is absolutely no doubt that anyone who endures, anyone who is patient and endures, and especially if someone does something wrong to them, if they endure that, Allah keeps elevating them. And those people that either try to exploit them, or try to put them down, or try to accuse them, or try to do, for example, what Zulaykha tried over here, to harm them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always take those people down. Every single time, without exception. Those people will always fall. They will fall in dunya and they will fall in akhirah if they do not make tawbah. The Prophet ﷺ tells us about a mother who is breastfeeding her child. And as she is there with her baby, this very wealthy, handsome man, prominent man, comes on his horse. People are following him. He has this grace about him. He has followers. He has charm, very expensive horse, very expensive clothing, beautiful appearance and presentation. And like most mothers would, she looks at this man, she says, wow, amazing. And right away, she makes dua, oh Allah, make my son like that. Now, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam is mentioning this hadith, And he says the boy is, and he actually, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam demonstrated with his finger that the boy is feeding from his mother, and all of a sudden he pulls his mouth away. Allah gives him the power to speak. She said, Allahumma ja'al ibni mithlahu. Oh Allah, make my child like him. He says, Allahumma la taj'alni mithlahu. Oh Allah, never make me like him. She said, what? He's speaking? And that's what he has to say? He goes back and starts drinking his mother's milk again. After some time, a woman is brought through the streets, and people are pulling her and beating her and swearing at her and insulting her, saying, Zanayti, Sadaqti, Zanayti, Sadaqti, you fornicated, you stole, you're like this, and people are insulting her and swearing at her. And right away, like any mother would, she became so scared. And so she made dua, Allahumma la taj'al ibni mithlaha. Oh Allah, never make my son like her. Never put him in that situation. Of course, who would want their son, their child to go through such a situation? So again, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that the baby pulled away from his mother and again spoke and said, Allahumma ja'alni mithlaha. Oh Allah, make me like her. She said, what's wrong with you? Wayhak, I am trying to make good du'as for you and you're just doing the opposite thing. So then the baby spoke, that the first man that came by, he looked, his presentation was of prominence, of grandeur, of importance, but he was a very wicked and evil man. His outside appearance betrayed what he was inside. And you wanted me to be like him, but in order to be like him, I would have to be wicked and evil like him as well. And so I asked Allah never ever to make me like him. And this woman who was dragged through the streets and insulted, and she was accused, the fact was that she was a very pious woman, and she was completely innocent of everything they were saying. Her outside circumstances looked like she was the most wretched person, but inside she was the most pious and pure person. And you did not want me to be like her, but I wanted to be like her because of her purity, her piety, and her truthfulness. So, worldly situations are deceiving. We don't know who is going through what. Sometimes the person with the smiling face is going through terrible circumstances inside. And sometimes the person who appears to be in a bad situation is in fact not exactly like that. So the story of Yusuf alayhi salatu wassalam teaches us that just because somebody is going through difficult times does not define if they're a good person or a bad person. Rather, it's their character, it's their iman, it's their a'mal. What are they doing in those circumstances? Sometimes all of our attention, even when it comes to our own circumstances, our attention is on our ahwal. What am I going through right now? All of our attention is on this and we want to make it better. But our attention is not focused enough on what I need to change, what I need to improve, what I need to do as an individual who wants to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is being asked from me in these circumstances? And this happens to us in good, when we're surrounded by good and enjoying prosperity and everything is going fine, we think, oh yes, I must have been doing something really good. But that's also a test. Allah tests by giving us things. Allah tests us by taking away things. Both are a way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala testing us, checking us, seeing what do we have inside. Have we come up to that level that we need to come up to or not? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this month and its blessed moments and its worship a means of us changing for the better and becoming such that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Allah, 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 Allah.